Assalamu alaikum og velkommen til Aafia-konferansen. Mitt navn Arfa Qureshi og jeg skal lede dere gjennom programmet I dag. Men før vi setter I gang så skal vi ha koranresitasjon av Abdullah Tayyib.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم من كان يريد ثواب الدنيا فعند الله ثواب الدنيا والآخرة وكان الله سميعا بصيرا يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله ولو على أنفسكم أو الوالدين والأقربين إن يكن غنيا أو فقيرا فالله أولى بهما فلا تتبعوا الهوى أن تعدلوا وإن تلووا أو تعرضوا فإن الله كان بما تعملون خبيرا يا أيها الذين آمنوا بالله ورسوله والكتاب الذي نزل على رسوله والكتاب الذي أنزل من قبل ومن يكفر بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسله واليوم الآخر فقد ضل ضلالا بعيدا صدق الله العظيم
Justice for Aafia Norway en gruppe med formål å forene alle I Norge som ønsker å ta opp kampen og kjempe for Dr. Aafia Siddiquis frihet. Vi holder diverse arrangementer for å spre budskapet om hennes sak. Vi samarbeider med ulike aktører for å sikre hennes løslatelse. Og vi samarbeider tett med familien hennes for å bistå dem I denne kampen. Dessuten legger vi press på myndigheter gjennom demonstrasjoner, vi skriver brev som vi har levert til ambassaden, og har møter for å legge press på de aktuelle myndighetene. Dere kan finne oss på diverse sosiale medier, og jeg anbefaler dere alle til å følge oss på Facebook-siden vår, Instagram-siden vår, og dere kan holde dere oppdatert via nettsiden vår også. Jeg skal prøve å kort oppsummere historien til Dr. Aafia for de av dere som ikke kjenner til hennes sak. I 1990 dro Dr. Aafia til USA for å studere. Hun markerte seg som en fremragende førsteårsstudent ved University of Houston og fikk et fullt stipend for å gå videre til MIT I Boston. Derfra ble hun eksaminert med utmerkelser, og senere nøt en like vellykket akademisk karriere ved Brandeis University. I 2002 valgte Dr. Aafia Siddiqui å reise hjem til Pakistan sammen med sin mann og 2 barn, og på det tidspunktet var Dr. Aafia også gravid med sitt 3. barn. I 2003, da Dr. Aafia skulle reise med sine barn til Islamabad fra Karachi, ble hun bortført, og hun kom aldri frem til Islamabad. Deretter forsvant Dr. Aafia for 5 år, og ingen vet hva som skjedde med henne, eller hvor hun og barna hennes var I de 5 årene. I 2008 derimot, etter noen rykter gikk rundt om en pakistansk kvinne som var fengslet I Afghanistan I Bagram, ble Dr. Aafia under svært tvilsomme omstendigheter løslatt. Og hun ble funnet gående langs gata sammen med sin sønn Ahmed, som var hennes eldste sønn. Her blir Dr. Aafia utsatt for et angrep, der hun blir skutt på av amerikanske soldater I deres fangenskap, og som senere, da hun skulle bli beskyldt for å ha angrepet amerikanske soldater. På grunn av denne hendelsen blir hun ført til USA I 2010, hvor hun da stilles for retten I New York. Her foregår det en rettssak, der Dr. Aafia blir dømt til 86 år I fengsel. Og der I USA sitter hun fengslet til den dag I dag. Hun sitter fengslet I Texas, I en av USAs strengeste fengsler, og hun har gjennomgått år etter år med tortur. I dag har vi fått en gjest fra England, og jeg skal bytte over til engelsk nå. We have our guest Moazzam Begg. He is a British-born Muslim and a former Guantanamo Bay detainee. Currently, he works as an outreach director for Cage Global. And after he was released from Guantanamo Bay, he became one of the most prominent public speakers and Muslim advocates for justice and for dialogue. He is also the author of the bestseller Enemy Combatant, in which he recounts his experience as an innocent man detained and tortured at Guantanamo, in Bagram and Kandahar in Afghanistan. Moazzam Begg will be talking about how his story helped locate Dr. Aafia and our role today in her case. So I would like to invite you up. You can use this microphone right here. I can turn it on. You just turn this on. Try it over.
Which is the on button? This one?
Yeah, that.
Can everybody hear me? Yes. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. Dear brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My pleasure and honor absolutely to be speaking to you here this afternoon, this evening, about a case that is very dear, I know, that to all of us, and that is the case of Dr. Aafia Siddiqui. But before I begin, I wanted to say that the last time I was in Oslo was in 2011. And I had come on the invitation of a particular individual who's I see right now at the back, whose name is Erling Bogan. And he made a film called Death in Camp Delta. And this was about the death of a prisoner in Guantanamo who died allegedly from committing suicide, though we suspected otherwise, alongside two others. This individual had survived a massacre, one of the biggest massacres in the war on terror that had taken place. Yet in Guantanamo, he met his death. His name was Yasser al-Zahrani, and his father also came here to take part in the screening of the film. His father was Colonel Talal al-Zahrani. Colonel Talal had been the chief of police in Medina for 30 years. Talal al-Zahrani himself is from a Madani, he's from the Medina. So to be in the presence of these people, and also another former prisoner of Guantanamo who had also survived one of the worst massacres that Talal had survived, his name is Walid al-Hajj. All of us together came here. And we're going to talk about some subjects that are a little heavy on the heart. So before I begin the heavy part, let me begin with the light part. Walid and I were sitting together. Walid is a Sudanese guy, and he's a Bedouin. He hasn't traveled very much at all outside of Sudan and Pakistan and Guantanamo. Those are the 3 places he'd been to, and the 4th place was Oslo. And we sat together and we were eating breakfast. And he sees somebody walk past through the window, and he says in Arabic, "Shuf shuf هذه المرأة تمشي بالغنم في الشارع," which means, look at that woman. She's walking with her sheep in the street. I look outside and I see there's a woman walking a poodle. I say, "Ya Walid, هذا ليس الغنم هذا الكلب. This is not a sheep, it's a dog." And he said, "What? Do they treat their dogs this way in this country?" I said, "Yes, they do." And that's the irony. The irony is because in some places they treat their dogs better than their human beings. And so getting to the story of Aafia Siddiqui, because that's what makes the link between this idea of, you see, one of the things, Walid was in Guantanamo for 6 years, I was there for 3. And in Guantanamo, there's a creature that exists. You see it every now and then. Whenever you're allowed outside your cell, you might see one. It's an iguana. They are protected under the Endangered Species Act. They are protected under American law. If you harm that iguana, you could be subjected to a fine or even imprisonment. That's a reptile. That reptile has reptilian rights. There have been prisoners in Guantanamo since January 2002 until now. The place is still open. 9 prisoners have died there, of whom Yasser was one. And the prisoners don't have legal rights. To this day, they don't have legal rights. The majority that were held there, almost 800 prisoners, were held without charge or trial by the world's most vociferous advocate of freedom, democracy, and human rights. In fact, one of the things that happens in Guantanamo, one of its mottos, is that a soldier, when he walks past an officer, he's required to do this: honor bound, to which the reply must be, to defend freedom. It's an irony, because in the name of freedom, you're holding people without charge or trial and to remove their freedom for 20 years. But there's one thing that the Guantanamo prisoners, I spoke to one very recently, Majid Khan, who was released. He's a Pakistani citizen. He was resettled to Belize, which most people couldn't recognize on the map. And you know, one of the first things he said to me, after being a victim of the US torture program, after being one of those quote-unquote high-value detainees who was subjected to, amongst other things, there are children here, I don't want to say it, but sexual violation. One of the first things he said to me, despite the fact that Majid Khan himself has not seen his youngest daughter, his only daughter rather, who's in Pakistan right now, he's not seen her. He's not been reunited with his wife. And he's living in a place where he's isolated. The first thing he said, "Brother Moazzam, we have to do something for Aafia Siddiqui." That's the first thing he said, even before he spoke about his own family. And I want you to think about this, before I go into the detail of how Aafia Siddiqui's case impacted my life. I want you to consider this. Has Aafia Siddiqui killed anyone? Was Aafia Siddiqui known to be a leading member of an organization that was at war with America? Was Aafia Siddiqui trained in the use of weapons in order to kill Americans? Is there anything that links Aafia Siddiqui tangibly to any plot to kill anybody? These are fundamental questions, because I'll tell you this. People accused of those things have been freed. 5 members of the Taliban who were held with me in Guantanamo were released in 2016 as part of a prisoner exchange for Sergeant Bo Bergdahl, who'd been taken into custody by the Taliban. So they did a prisoner exchange. Bo Bergdahl was released, and the 5 members of the Taliban, senior members of the Taliban, were sent to Qatar, where they helped to set up the political office of the Islamic Emirates and began the process of negotiations with the United States of America and its withdrawal from Afghanistan. Prisoners who were physically violated, stripped, tortured, abused, negotiated the withdrawal of the United States of America from Afghanistan. Think about that for a moment. Senior, and all of those men that I speak of are senior members of the Afghanistan government. Some of them are governors, some of them are ministers, information ministers, defense minister, seriously high-level political positions. And you know, it is reported that even they, though Aafia is not an Afghan citizen, tried to call for and seek Aafia Siddiqui's release. So you have all of these other people. There's members who were connected to Al-Qaeda, members who were connected to plots, people who were convicted in the bogus kangaroo courts of the military commissions in Guantanamo have all been released. So what crime is it that Aafia has committed that she pays a price greater than any of the people I've mentioned so far? How is she a greater threat? How is the evidence against her greater than those who were committed to fighting and expelling the Americans from Afghanistan by physical force? How is she a greater threat than that? A child psychologist, somebody who is of a weak, frail body, somebody who perhaps her greatest crime, if you look back to her history, was to advocate for the rights of women within Islam. If you listen to her impassioned speeches, that's what she's doing. She's advocating for the rights of the Muslims who is facing genocide in Bosnia as a young student at MIT. Is that her crime? Genocide? The biggest genocide that took place in Europe after World War II, after the Holocaust, took place against Europe's indigenous, white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, Slavic, Muslim population. Genocide. Islamophobia doesn't get worse than genocide. Yet the term Islamophobia, it's as if it doesn't exist, and we seem to have forgotten. And Aafia Siddiqui, at that time, is speaking about the Muslims and how they should be helped. Is that a crime? Did they say, oh, because of that, that's Aafia has a terrorist mindset because of that reason? Did that seal her fate? Did allegations... In fact, if you think about it, Aafia Siddiqui is not even convicted as a terrorist. In the war on terrorism, when people will call her all sorts of names and say to perhaps some of you, why are you campaigning for a convicted terrorist? She's not a convicted terrorist. But I'll tell you who was a convicted terrorist that the whole world celebrates. Nelson Mandela was a convicted terrorist. We have a statue of him outside the British Parliament. So having these labels means nothing. Calling somebody something is like a school playground allegation that means nothing. Aafia Siddiqui was convicted for the attempted shooting of an American soldier, but in fact the only one who got shot was Aafia Siddiqui, an unarmed Aafia Siddiqui. An Aafia Siddiqui who miraculously turns up in a police station in Ghazni after being disappeared somewhere for 5 years. A dark period where nobody really knows what's going on. Smoke and mirrors. But what do I know about this? I was living in Afghanistan in 2001, with my wife and children. We'd been there for a few months. We were working on a project to build a school for girls. A girls' school, a girls' primary school in Kabul. And I continued to do that and was involved in it until the 9/11 attacks and then the subsequent US bombing and invasion of Afghanistan. I evacuated with my family and we eventually made it to Pakistan, which is where I'm from originally. We remained there for a few months, helping other refugee families, helping others escape and trying to hopefully return to the school. But the school was destroyed in a strike. And on the night of the 31st of January 2002, there was a knock on my door. I opened the door and there were a bunch of people there. None of them identified. No identification papers, no ID cards, just a gun. A gun straight to my head, pushed me onto the floor, the forecourt of my house, tied my hands behind my back, tied my legs, and the last thing I saw before they blacked out my life for the next 3 years was them walking into the room where my wife and children were asleep. Nobody in uniform. They put me into the back of this car, and in this car, when they lifted the hood off my head, I see 2 white guys sitting in the front, pretending to be Pakistanis, but nobody can pretend to be a Pakistani. You are the one or you're not. And these guys, wearing their shalwar kameez and their red faces, said to me that you can either answer our questions here or answer them in Guantanamo Bay. So this wasn't the ISI operating alone, this was now the CIA. This was American intelligence. And eventually, after a whole series of being detained in different places in Pakistan, and then in Kandahar, and then I was taken to Bagram. And Bagram is a place where I stayed for almost 1 year. And during May of 2002, I was interrogated and held with other prisoners, including one who you may have heard of. His name is Sadiq al-Madani, who was also in prison with me. Both of us, in fact all of us, heard the screams of women. In one interrogation, they had my hands behind my back and tied them to my hands, and they brought in photographs that they'd seized from my house of my children and my family. And while the sound of a woman was screaming in the next cell, this was up on the first floor, not in the communal area where all the other prisoners were, but up on the first floor, where they would take us for interrogations. I heard the sounds of a woman screaming. And I don't know. I couldn't have identified that voice, because I've never heard anybody from my own family scream like that. But I know it was somebody's wife, somebody's sister. They made me believe it was my wife. And they asked me while I'm being interrogated, where are your wife and children now? What do you think happened to them the night we took you? So they led me to believe that that was going on. And I've never been violent towards any of the American prisoners as soldiers, ever. In fact, some of the American soldiers have visited me in my house. Some of them became Muslims, some didn't, but several of them have visited me in my house. But there was never a time that I felt like strangling one of those soldiers more than when I heard those screams. And eventually I was taken downstairs, and I remember the other prisoners, the rumor had spread is that they're torturing my wife. They put that out. But alhamdulillah, after several months I got a letter through the Red Cross that my wife has arrived home, that she's safe, and that a child has been born. I didn't know the name of the child until I was freed. And however, I did still believe that there was a woman there. There was definitely a woman there. When I was eventually released from Guantanamo, one of the first things I did, I started to investigate. I checked with the International Committee of the Red Cross. They wouldn't give me a great deal of detail, but they said there was a woman there. And they confirmed that prisoner 650, that was her number. There were 4 prisoners who unbelievably escaped from Bagram. All members of Al-Qaeda, they're all Al-Qaeda guys, and openly so. But one thing they said, one of the guys who was released, he said before he himself was killed, was that there was a woman in custody. He specified her number as prisoner 650, but he also said that she was a Pakistani woman. Added a detail that nobody knew. And he also said that she had children that she'd been separated from. And he also said, لَقَدْ فَقَدَتْ عَقْلَهَا, that she had lost her mind. Now, from everything we know, Aafia Siddiqui disappeared literally 20 years ago this month. I was out of Bagram in February 2003. So I don't know, the timing doesn't fit about the screams that I heard and Aafia. There's a discrepancy there. Somebody was there for sure. Having said that, and having spoken to Salid Iqbal Madani and to another prisoner, former prisoner called Binyam Muhammad, both those individuals say, and who were there after I was, and who were there in March 2003, both say that the woman they saw with their eyes was Aafia Siddiqui. So this means, based on that eyewitness testimony, that it is very, very likely that Aafia was there in this period of time. But that the person I heard was probably not Aafia and somebody else. And I'm not too sure if whether Aafia Siddiqui was prisoner 650 or not. I still don't know. The other thing about this is that when I told my story about this to Sister Yvonne Ridley, who's very close to me and to a lot of us in the UK, she made it a mission of hers to travel. She traveled to Afghanistan, she traveled to Bagram, she made a film called The Grey Lady of Bagram, Prisoner 650. She tried to investigate. She went and she met with the people who were present when Aafia is allegedly supposed to have taken hold of this American soldier's gun and tried to shoot him. And she came with an entirely different story, including police officers saying that Aafia hadn't shot at anyone. And all of this was going on. It's really important, sorry, just to backtrack a little bit. During the period of time in which Aafia Siddiqui had disappeared, Aafia kept on, Yvonne Ridley kept on asking the Americans, at Bagram in particular, that we believe that there's a woman here. Can you tell us whether Aafia Siddiqui is here? She kept on asking again and again, and she raised it in the media, and she raised it in the, asked the US Defense Department, and kept on pressurizing them. And it's shortly after Yvonne put that pressure on that, lo and behold, I receive a video of a woman who interrogators are saying in Ghazni is Aafia Siddiqui. So this was kind of the timeline, the trajectory, that all of a sudden she appears after being disappeared for 5 years. And it's after that then Yvonne Ridley went and did the full investigation and then made the film and put it out. She was the one who got Imran Khan on board. She told Imran Khan about what had happened. Imran Khan himself, I met him a couple of times before he became Prime Minister, was very moved and very keen on doing something about Aafia's case. In the midst of all of that, of course, she gets sent to America. She's tried in some kind of ridiculous show trial, and I've still not understood. I have literally come across people who, as part of the agreement between the United States and Afghanistan, America will not be prosecuting them because they were taking part in a war, but they could have killed American soldiers. And yet Aafia She was taken to the US, separated from her children, which again is another deeply, deeply painful story, and prosecuted, charged, prosecuted, convicted, and imprisoned. As you know, an 86-year sentence. During that time, as I said, we've already learnt and been told that she had lost her mind, but that may have been temporary, because the periods of time in which it's been reported and people have spoken to her, she's been of sound mind, at least up to the point when she was at trial, telling people there should be no violence done in her name, because that's one of the things you've heard several times, people taking others hostage, calling for Aafia's release. That's not the way. And she's the first person to say that's not the way. But as time has progressed, her mental state has regressed. Last year she was attacked by another prisoner. Aafia is a small-framed person. She's not a physically violent person. And yet she was attacked by a much larger prisoner, scalded in her face with a hot tea, and cut across her face. My friend and lawyer, Clive Stafford Smith, recently visited her in HM Carswell, where she's held. And he told me that she is not in a good state. Not at all. I can't tell you the detail because it's too painful and unnecessary. But suffice to say that Aafia Siddiqui has deteriorated by being abandoned and not being brought back home. Where? And again I will tell you this. There are prisoners in Guantanamo who were convicted of, quote unquote, and I refuse the terminology, but they say, let's for example, war crimes. They're all back home. They're all back home. Including, and again I don't want to mention his name because I don't want to sully his name, but one accused of killing an American soldier. One accused of actually killing an American soldier, the details of which are known. He's back home. He himself is a victim of torture. He's back home and with his family. Think about that. In Aafia's case, the judge refused to admit any evidence that was pertaining to her alleged time as a prisoner in Bagram, meaning anything to do with the period at which she said that we think that she was tortured. None of that was admitted. When Clive, as I said, came back, I was very pleased because the first time I had ever met Clive Stafford Smith was in a solitary confinement cell where I had been for almost 3 years in Guantanamo. He's the first friendly face I saw who advocated on my behalf. And I've known him for years. He's been defending and fighting for the rights of the Guantanamo prisoners non-stop from that time till now, as well as against death penalty cases in America. So for him to take on the case now, after all of these years, because there was a period of time, and let's face it, when Aafia got convicted, most people said, that's it, she's had justice. But if anybody knows the American quote-unquote injustice oxymoron, then you'll know that to be convicted in America, to receive, it's either a plea deal where you admit you're guilty for a crime, even if you don't believe you've done it, or you or you go not guilty, and the likelihood of your conviction is massive, and you will get a sentence longer than your life expectancy. The sentence that you'll receive will be longer than you will actually live. And that's what they've done with Aafia. So there was no hope of justice the moment that they took her away. The moment they took her away, how does America get jurisdiction to take her all the way from a place that she's not even in? So the fact that Clive's now involved is very fortuitous for us. It means that the campaign can be reinvigorated. Clive works hard on his clients. He won't leave them. Just recently he helped to bring back home two brothers, Pakistani brothers, Ghulam Ahmed Rabbani and Abdul Rahim Rabbani, both of whom were held in Guantanamo for 21 years without charge or trial. They came home to Karachi to see Jawad, Ahmed's son, that he's never met in his life. And we call that a success story. That's a success story. In my world, people being freed after 21 years of torture and abuse and pain and sacrifice and suffering and separation from family, in my world, these are success stories. Other people call them tragedies. I call them a success. Aafia's case can be a success story. The people blocking her return, let's face it, are the very people, I believe, that facilitated her being there in the first place, and that is the Pakistani government, particularly the intelligence services. But I have to say something to them. You know that for all this period of time, you either played the role of facilitating her to be sent there to begin with, and even if you didn't, you blocked her return. Former Guantanamo prisoners convicted of crimes went back home to serve their sentences in Canada, in Australia, in Yemen, in Sudan. If America can make those kind of deals with those countries, then there's no reason why the Pakistani government cannot sign the prisoner transfer agreement. And that is that you have a reciprocal treaty that a prisoner convicted of a crime in your country that's serving a sentence can be sent back home to serve the remainder of their sentence. That's easily done. The Americans have no reason to keep Aafia there. And if there's one thing we know, that Aafia, as a person, as a terminology they use to describe her, Om ki beti, the daughter of the nation. If this is how you treat the daughter of the nation, imagine the sons. Pakistan has already learnt a terrible, terrible reputation for having no principles, no morals, corrupt from top to bottom. And it harms all of us, including the diaspora communities who live in the West. We don't want to be associated with that. We want to be associated with justice. We want to be associated with truth. We want to be associated with things that are good, that are beneficial for us, for mankind. We don't want to be associated with what the Pakistani government has done to its own people and Aafia Siddiqui. So it is upon us to put pressure on the government, and I don't know, the government in Pakistan at the moment is it's difficult to identify what the government is. But we have to appeal to persons in position, because there's one thing that we know, that Aafia unites us. Aafia unites you whether you're left or right. Aafia unites you whatever school of thought you're from. Aafia unites you whether you're from the north or the south. Aafia unites you whether you're from Sindh or Balochistan or from Khyber Pakhtunkhwa or Punjab. Aafia unites you at every level. In fact, Aafia unites the Muslim Ummah. In fact, Aafia unites humanity. Because she's a woman facing the type of thing that even men are not facing. And one of the worst crimes you could do to a woman in that way is to separate her from her children. And then not allowed her to be present when her relatives start to die. Aafia's mother, who I had the honor of meeting several years ago, is a very strong woman, very dignified woman, very dignified. And she held on until the last breath for her daughter to come home. She showed me the rooms. This is where Aafia used to be as a young girl, how she used to teach, how she used to learn, how she used to do khidmah for her. She told me all of these things. Tears in her eyes, but strong as a rock. We sat in Aafia's house And people came and recited the poetry of Iqbal, none of which I understand. But it was the type of household where that type of thing happens. A dignified, educated, thoughtful, Islamic household. And to see it ripped apart like this is our collective shame. So finally, I would say this, that to have a corner in Norway so separate, so distant from the war on terror, so distant from Afghanistan and Pakistan, the United States of America, and yet there's this place here in Oslo where people come out to listen to the case and the story of Aafia Siddiqui and want to do something years later. There are young men here who probably have never heard of what is Aafia Siddiqui. Young sisters, never heard of it. As time goes on, we cannot forget our sister. And so I thank the brothers and sisters here at the Aafia Coalition in Oslo for allowing me to also reinvigorate myself, because we also get busy with stuff and forget, and we are also guilty of that. So I am hopeful and even excited that, having spoken with my friend Clive, who's got a little message for you in a moment, he's on the case. And when Clive takes on a case, he will not give up. I know this for a fact. He will not give up. He will put us to shame. He will put us Muslim Pakistanis to shame. Because he's been fighting for our brothers in Guantanamo right from the beginning. When the most of the world said they're terrorists, dehshatgard hain, unko chhod do, kuch kiya hoga unhone. When everybody said that, this guy came along and said, nah, no. You treat them as human beings, otherwise I'm coming for you. That's what we need to do. We need to stand together and stand for Aafia. So if we can play that little video, if we can play that little video, this is just a small little message from Clive to acknowledge what he's doing.
Clive Stafford Smith, and I'm recording this message for you because I'm sorry I can't be there with you in person. I was seeing Aafia Siddiqui in Texas for a legal visit in January, and it was incredibly depressing to find this woman in such a traumatized state. You know, of course, she is the only woman notoriously to have gone through the whole rendition to torture process that so many of my clients from Guantanamo Bay have been through. But she is more traumatized, perhaps, than any of the people I met in Guantanamo. And we very much need to get her back home to Pakistan. It won't be an easy job. I fear there's obstacles in Pakistan more than there are in America to her return. But we just need to work out who those people are who oppose it, and we need to let them know they have nothing to fear from her. They just need to worry about doing justice. And certainly, I, for one, am very grateful to all of you there at this meeting for what you're doing to try to support her, and I hope we can work together to get some justice for her. Thank you very much.
Okay. So put the light on. So finally, really, that's all there is to say. Other than it's important that we tell our generations, our younger generations, about Aafia. We raise our hands in the middle of the night in Qunut and mention Aafia Siddiqui by name. I believe some of Aafia Siddiqui's du'as also have been answered, in that she made du'as against those who oppressed her, and some of those oppressors are no longer around. But we need to raise our hands and remember her in our prayers by name. She is not Qawm ki beti. She is Ummat ki beti. That's who she is. Everybody knows her name from across the world. And let us work together, inshallah. Make some actions. There's some plans we have together. Inshallah, we'll work on them with you. to ensure that her case is remembered. We're going to write about it in the mainstream press, do interviews about it, do conferences about it, discussions and debates about it, write reports about it, make films about her, whatever is necessary, and lobby those people in Pakistan who've been the stumbling block in stopping her release. But in the end, there's only one who can order her release, and that is the one who we worship, Allah Azza wa Jalla. I started this dua, I said, Allahumma la sahla illa ma ja'altu sahla wa anta taj'al hazna idha shi'ta sahla. Oh Allah, nothing is easy except that which you make easy, and you will make the difficult easy if you so wish. So let's please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this great month with our actions and our deeds, and perhaps as a result of that, our du'as will also be answered. Wa sallallahu sallam ala nabina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi sallam.
So we're going to open up for questions from the audience, if anybody would like to start.
First of all, thank you for coming. You mentioned that the intelligence in Pakistan is corrupt, and that's what we all know that. But what can we do? Is it the awareness? Is that where we're lacking, or do we need to do something else to get this case out?
Clive alluded, so the question about the brother is that is the intelligence services are the ones that's blocking Aafia's release. What can we do to essentially change the situation? You may have heard Clive that he mentions that the blockage isn't from the Americans as much as it is from Pakistan. Why is Pakistan blocking it? What's the reason? Pakistan has recently just brought back former Guantanamo prisoners. Pakistan's been involved in helping the negotiations with the Americans in Afghanistan. Imran Khan talked about that. So what is the blockage? The only blockage that I believe is embarrassment. I would say that some people who are bishar, how can they be embarrassed? They don't have embarrassment. So how can they be? But yet there is. I've been told that one of the blockages when the Islamic Emirate called for the release of Afghanistan, the release of Aafia Siddiqui to Pakistan, was the Pakistani government, the ISI. She's our citizen. What are you doing calling for a return? True, they're right. You should be doing it. And so they need to stop feeling that they're going to be embarrassed. Nobody cares. I think that line is broken now. Nobody cares. They know you're beshar. But do the right thing and bring her back. People, Aafia Siddiqui will not be able to talk about you. She's not of sound mind. You just need to let her come back. And your shame, let that remain with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it doesn't matter. So really that's what we need to do. We need to somehow convince them. Forget about this. Forget about people shaming you and embarrassing you and so forth. She needs to come home. She won't be able to do anything to you anyway. She's not in the state to do so.
Any other questions? I have a question. We're living in times of increased Islamophobia and hostility towards Muslims. It's a topic we're going to talk about tomorrow. And it's not necessarily always overtly, but it's present. How does this impact people's willingness to get behind the cause of Dr. Aafia Siddiqui and demanding her release when she has been, for all intents and purposes, portrayed as a threat to Western society, to America, and to the world at large?
When I say the name Aafia Siddiqui, most of you people will have some understanding of it. If we were to say it out in the street in Main Street, Oslo, nobody's ever heard of her. If we were to say it out in Main Street, in the mainstream in New York, nobody's heard of her. If you were to do so in any major city in America or Britain, nobody's heard of her. The only people who have heard of her are those who care. And that number has dwindled over the years. So if somebody argues that for me to do something for Aafia Siddiqui is going to invoke the fear of Islamophobia, I'd say, please, you're out of touch. You may talk about stuff that is more modern, ISIS and Afghanistan and whatever. I'd say fair enough. But Aafia Siddiqui is down the list. She's near the bottom now because time has moved on. And as I said, there's people here who think Guantanamo is closed. I think in this room right now, there's people who think that Guantanamo is closed. But it's still open. There's still 31 prisoners there. Things have moved on. People have grown. New generations have come forward, and we need to remind them. But in the answer to your question, I don't think that Aafia Siddiqui's case is one that will get the Islamophobes against you. There's other cases, but Aafia is not one of them, because they don't really know her anymore.
I just wanted to know what happened to her children when they were separated, when she brought to the prison.
Okay, yeah. So the sister said she wants to know what happened to Aafia's children when she was separated from them and taken to Bagram. My knowledge, sister, of this, so I've met with Ahmed. You know, the real funny thing is, right, when I went to Pakistan in 2010, I was greeted at the airport by hundreds of people, me and Yvonne Ridley, and they were putting, you know, when they put the heart of flowers on you, they put so many over me I could barely see. And this was all on the honor of Aafia's family and everybody, the campaigners for us. And we were driving through Karachi, and with Fawzia, they asked me, they said, you have to do a talk to the people. And I can talk well, alhamdulillah, in English. I can even do Arabic. But Urdu is much harder for me. So they made me do a talk outside the, what do you call it? The opening in the sunroof. The sunroof. They made me do a talk out of the sunroof of the car. The Nazir style, I think, right? And in Urdu, alongside Fawzia and Ahmed. Ahmed at the time was a young boy. He was about 8 or 9 years old. I also met with Maryam. And alhamdulillah, they were very happy, very intelligent kids. It's just Suleiman I didn't know, but at the time I didn't know what happened to him. But to my knowledge, Aafia has not seen her kids from that time till now. And I can't understand what that would do to any mother. I was separated from my kids for 3 years only. And it broke me down to the point at which I used to tell myself that I'm not a father, because if I remembered my kids, it would depress me. I'm as a father, that's a father who goes out and so forth. Imagine a mother. It's unimaginable.
Also, just to add on, we don't know what happened to her youngest son, Suleiman. He disappeared, I believe he was 6 months old at the time of disappearance.
Yeah, it was reported that Suleiman disappeared and is still
missing.
Still unknown,
Yeah. We don't know.
My question is connected to my first question. Since you said that Pakistan is not interested in taking her back, and the courts in the US probably know that as well, can any other country step in? Can we get some other Muslim countries to...
So the brother's question is that, is it possible to get Aafia repatriated or to resettle to another country because Pakistan won't take it? The problem is that she is a national of Pakistan, and that she maintains she still has her nationality. So the only place the Americans could send her back to is Pakistan, legally. If any other country could intervene on humanitarian grounds, I don't know who could or would do that. The only place I think that could or would are the ones who already asked for her release, and the north of Pakistan. And it is unlikely. Although if I've seen any country carry out prisoner exchange repeatedly with the Americans, it's the Afghans. They know how to value, they value their prisoners. They value their people, and they seek, if they take somebody captive, they only do it so that they can have their captives released. I don't know any other country that would do that, because that would mean a very political move that may also put them. Pakistan may turn against them for that reason. Their relationship with Pakistan will probably, if it's a friendly nation like Turkey, for example, imagine the strain that would put on their relations.
There was a question in the back.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
I have come to know that there was a legal team who has traveled from Pakistan. Last month, the the start of this month, they have traveled from Karachi, the group of advocates or maybe a legal team, to facilitate the process to take Aafia back. So have you heard about that?
I've heard of something about a legal team there being sent by the Pakistani government. I don't know to what extent they've been effective or that they've done what they are saying that they're going to do. And I don't know to what extent there's been that's been communicated to the family and to the lawyers who've been acting on her behalf. So the answer is I don't know. The short answer is I don't know. And I don't know how much weight there is in that. Again, I reiterate this. I reiterate so it's understood. Sudan has taken people convicted. Yemen has taken people convicted so that they can serve out the rest of their sentence in those countries. I think that the relationship between the United States and Pakistan is greater than both of those two put together. So I can't see why something like this cannot be achieved in a much shorter space of time, except for the lack of will.
Excuse me, one question. As you have mentioned many times in your speech that the Pakistani government and especially the officials, they have some hurdles, are not even want to take the back the Aafia. So some months before, Sister Fozia, she was here, and she mentioned that the family of Aafia Siddiqui, they have suffered too much in the time of the last government period. So she was also very clear that they don't know how before this Imran Khan government, so he was very committed to take Aafia home, but after his government, so they have blocked many ways to make contact with her. So what happened over there? Especially we overseas Pakistanis and diaspora, so we are liking too much to Imran Khan and we are supporting them. But what happened with him especially?
That's a very, very good question. I don't know. The answer is I don't know. As I said, I've met Imran Khan a couple of times and I believed him to be very sincere in the case of Aafia Siddiqui. Power, I think, changes people's perceptions, but I think something we're learning now is that Imran Khan, I think he had to make some kind of a deal with the Pakistani military, and that's now, the deal is now broken, and part of that deal would have necessitated an entirely different approach to Aafia Siddiqui, in fact even one that would require you to be silent on. And I think if that's what happened, then it's a mistake. Aafia Siddiqui is something that can mobilize people in Pakistan, really mobilize. And we need to do that again. Maybe not on the streets in the same way it will happen, but at least in social media. We need to really kick this thing, make it alive. Across parties, across schools of thought, across madahib and firqas and so forth, people support Aafia Siddiqui, and we need to work on that.
Can you tell a little bit about your recovery and how that was after 3 years?
I'm still recovering. No, I mean, I'll talk more about that probably tomorrow, inshallah, if you're able to attend. My recovery is, I don't consider myself a victim at all. My story is irrelevant, really. It's only necessary because I want to talk about Aafia's case or other things. I cannot thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enough for all the bounties He's given me. I can't. If you were to count the blessings of Allah, you wouldn't be able to do so. Out of Guantanamo and everything that followed, yeah, I've suffered some things, but I have gained so much that I really cannot. I can't count it. I can't even quantify it. Some of my best friends spent 5, 6, 7 times the amount I spent in Guantanamo. So I am deeply blessed.
So I have the question about her husband. You told that she was traveling with her husband and children, but did anything happen to her husband as well?
Sorry, I don't understand the question. Traveling where?
When she was traveling to Pakistan. the first time when she was taken.
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know about that part. If you're talking about her relationship with her husband, I really don't know much about that. I'm sorry. There was another sister who had her hand up here. She put it down.
I actually had my hand on. There was other one who asked the same question about Imran Khan. But it's one thing in my mind now. You said that Pakistan would want to have Dr. Aafia back because it's about something about shame. Are you sure about that? That this is the only thing? Because in my mind, I think it could be more political issues and just that they are ashamed to take her back.
It's a good question, sister. That's my assumption.
Yeah.
I won't. I don't know why they're not bringing her back. I just know they have.
Can you repeat the question?
Sorry, the question is that you said that you think that they're not bringing her back because Pakistan government is ashamed and they'll be, put on the spotlight again. Are you sure that it's that she's asking, or do you think it's something else? I said my answer is the truth is I don't know.
Because you have spoken with Imran Khan and other military or other political guys, or the family of Dr. Aafia. What is the feeling you get? Is it because of the shame? Because in my head, it could be anything else, because as Pakistan as it is now, I think shame is the last thing goes in my mind. I'm sorry about that, but I can't.
Okay, so let me define a little bit what I may be entirely wrong. I have no idea why they're doing this. I just know they haven't.
Yeah, because we have spoken with Imran Khan. What?
Yeah.
He's like.
So I spoke to him as I said before he became Prime Minister.
Yeah.
About this subject, and he was more at the time in the kind of place of learning and believing that this is a terribly wrong thing than anything else. So his view was, what's happened is totally wrong and we need to do everything to get her back. That was his absolute view. In fact, his view was that Pakistan's entire role in the war on terrorism, of handing people over, including me, only damaged Pakistan and destroyed its image as a country. He said that also about Moazzam Begg, who was the Afghani ambassador. He was the ambassador and the spokesman of the Taliban, who had his own embassy. He was detained at the embassy, so all of his diplomatic protections were removed. And he went on the same flight with me to Guantanamo. So the point is, I believe that this is not just a normal shame. This is a, you can't just say, if they were to bring Aafia Siddiqui back, Aafia may not be able to say anything, but you and I can. Your sister or your cousin or your relatives there can, and everybody else can. Everybody else will. The media will hold her attack. They will not. If Aafia comes back to Pakistan, no one's going to be silent. Even if we say Aafia will be silent, everybody else won't. You won't be able to stop it. It will be a tidal wave. And then questions will be asked. And those questions will go to the root of Pakistan Intelligence Service's role in the rendition of their own citizens to the Americans, where people were murdered. I saw the Quran torn up in front of my eyes, ripped into pieces, and urinated upon by the American soldiers. That's just one of the things that were happening. And did Pakistan know that was happening? And were they willing participants in this? You see, it's bigger than this shame. It's accountability. And I think that's a big thing.
In the aftermath of your liberation, have there been legal actions against you to silence you or to imprison you again?
No. I've carried out legal actions. I've been involved in various legal actions, including giving evidence to the International Criminal Court for the role of the Americans in the abuses in Bagram. And this is really interesting. It shows you the level of justice or injustice America adheres to. So recently you may have heard that the Americans and others are calling for Vladimir Putin to be taken to the International Criminal Court and tried as a war criminal. I think that's fine. He should be. But let's get things in order first, because there's crimes that took place that are still unpunished. The International Criminal Court approached me and several former Bagram prisoners and said, we are investigating America, the Afghan National Army, and the Taliban. All three entities. So could you give us some evidence about what you suffered and witnessed in Bagram? And we did. The American response, you know what the American response was? I'm not joking, this is to the International Criminal Court, was any member of the ICC that is involved in investigating America, interrogating our citizens, will be prosecuted, imprisoned, sanctioned, and refused entry to America if they try to come in. And they did that. They put Fatou Bensouda, who was the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, under sanctions and a no-fly list to America. Then the ICC, at that time, the chief prosecutor was changed. He was a Qadiani guy from the UK. I'm not joking. He said, we're not going to investigate America anymore. We're only investigating the Taliban. So this gives you an idea of how the international justice system works and how America works with it. I've been involved in a multitude of legal processes, including in the UK, giving evidence against British intelligence services who were involved in torture in Bagram and Guantanamo. And the police, after agreeing to take on the case, dropped it, which is what we completely expected. So in all of this, the legal processes are very, very hard to achieve justice. Where things work is in the court of public opinion. Embarrassment.
So I have a request from the audience, if you could share some words about your time in Guantanamo, and especially how you kept the morale up, if you were able to pray, or anything of the sort.
Okay, so that question, somebody asked it last night, and I'm going to repeat. So the question of did they let you pray, for any Muslim, you should think about this question. You should think about, could you ever ask a question like this of a Muslim? Did they let you pray? Allah Azza wa Jalla says in the Quran, الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ. The Muslims are ones who remember Allah standing, sitting, or even lying down on their sides. My first prayer in American custody was with my hands tied behind my back, a hood over my head, my legs in front of me shackled down, the sounds of engines roaring and dogs barking and prisoners screaming and soldiers cursing. And next to me, a young man says salam to me, who's in the same position. I can't see him because I've got a hood over my head. He said, "Akhi, hal sallayta salat al-maghrib." Brother, have you prayed Maghrib prayers? I'm thinking, oh, we're going to live or die. I don't know what's going to happen. And this guy's thinking about Salat al-Maghrib. And I said, no, brother, I haven't prayed. And I say to him, he says, I think we should pray. I said, you're on the left, so you're the imam. As I'm about to pray, an American soldier comes and he puts a knife to my neck. This is we're in Kandahar. I'd like to be flown from here to, we're in Islamabad. We're in Islamabad, we're about to be flown to Kandahar. So we're in the city of Islam. That's where we are, we're in the city of Islam. And this American soldier says, if you speak again, I'll slit your throat. At this point, the brother says, Allahu Akbar. And that's my first prayer in American custody. He finished, my neck is still here, as you can see, and the soldier walked away. So don't ever put a question to a Muslim, did they let you pray? If you had no arms, no legs, you'd still be required to pray, and you still could pray. And that's what's beautiful about our faith. In Bagram, I did tayammum. Do you know what tayammum is?
Yeah.
For 1 year. And I did it because they gave us one water bottle. For those who don't know, tayammum is when you do this kind of dry ablution. You've got no water, so you just hit your hands on the dirt, rub them together, and rub your face, and that's it. You're ritually pure now. You can't use the water, because the water they gave us one bottle to drink per day. That's it. That's all you got. It's the only water you've got. But in that period of time, I mean, I can tell you so much, but I'm going to tell you the whole story in like 2 minutes. It's impossible. My happiest day was the day I finished my memorization of Surah Al-Baqarah. I didn't have a teacher. We weren't even allowed to raise our voices. So if I do my recitation, it's like that. If you raise your voice, they'll take you to the front of the cell, lock you up with your hands chained to the top, suspended to the point at which you're on your tiptoes, and put a hood over your head and leave you there for 5-6 hours. That's if you're caught talking. And one of the definitions of talking is reciting the Quran with a loud voice. So, despite all of that, I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for every moment. Every single moment.
During your legal battles, has economy ever been a hindrance?
In any legal battle, economy or finance, funds is always a problem. Of course it is. That's always the case. Because unfortunately, we live in such societies where justice is dependent on how much you can fund it. Justice isn't about natural, pure justice, whether something's right or whether it's wrong. Justice is about how much can you fund it? Can you get the best lawyers? The best lawyers, mostly, not always, are the most expensive lawyers, charging hundreds, sometimes thousands of pounds an hour. That's not justice. That's business. So unfortunately, in the world of trying to seek justice, that is one of the problems. Having said that, there are lawyers like Clive Stafford Smith, like Gareth Peirce, and many others who really, they're not Muslims. But their actions are from Islam. Really. They're not Muslims. But their actions are like that you would, the selflessness, the way in which they advocate on behalf of their clients, and they don't regard them as clients. Clive talks to me about me as a friend. And these type of people, we should remember that it's within the Islamic tradition. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this about a disbeliever in the Quran, a polytheist. إِنَّكَ لَا تَهْدِي مَنْ أَحْبَبْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَنْ يَشَاءُ. He says this about whom? Allah says, Abu Talib. He says to the Prophet ﷺ, you could not guide who you loved. You loved him. But Allah will guide who He wishes. But we never forget that the good that Abu Talib did right till his last moment. And we at this time, especially in the Western world, we need lots of Abu Talibs.
One final question in the back there.
Yes, have you ever seen someone get killed in front of you?
The question is, the brother asked, have I ever seen anybody get killed in front of me? The answer is yes, I have. I have witnessed murder. I witnessed the murder of 2 men in Bagram. The first was a guy who tried to escape from the back of the cell. He managed to call out where the barbed wire was, and he was an Afghani, and 2 soldiers whose names I remember still to this day. They beat him to death with elbow strikes and knee strikes to his face, to his groin, to his body, and they carried out his body. That was the first one. The second one was, his story is featured in a film called Taxi to the Dark Side, which won the Oscar for Best Documentary in 2008. And his name was Dilawa. His hands were tied to the top of the cage, and he was punched repeatedly in front of me. They took his body away. He was still alive. And they kept him for more interrogation. And I learned a long time later that he was murdered. And the way he was murdered was because he said Allah. Because he said Allah every time they kicked him, the soldiers found it amusing that this prisoner says Allah every time you kick him. So all the soldiers on duty that night, they came to kick him on his leg, and the blood clotted on his leg. He got a heart attack and he died. I learnt about his death by American interrogators the next year when I was in Guantanamo, and I'd been there for a year. They brought me photographs of Dilawa's body and asked me if I recognized him. And then they showed me the pictures of the soldiers who they say are accused of being involved in his murder. And I pointed out this one, this one, this one, and this one. And then they asked me the strangest question: would you be willing to be a witness in any potential trial against these people? And I said, how was it going to do? I said, yes, I would be. How are you going to do that? Are you going to take me in chains? How are you going to get me there? I've not been charged with a crime. And I knew it was an exercise in futility. It was just trying to see whether I would or not. His killers received dishonorable discharges and demotions, and that was it, for blunt force, trauma, murder.
We're running out of time now. I'm just wondering, do you have any final message to the audience here? And if you have any tangible action or steps that we can take as a community to help Dr. Aafia's case?
All I can say to you at the moment is that continue to work with the Aafia Coalition. We, myself, the very fact that I'm present here now, inshallah, will establish a link and connection with my own organization that is very closely connected to fighting for prisoners, including Aafia, as well as I said, through my lawyer client. I believe there's several actions that are planned over the next few weeks and months. We'll probably reach out to you for support in terms of putting the message out, gaining support. If you have contacts with prominent people, I see that the Pakistani community is quite strong. Prominent people that have connections to people in Pakistan, politicians and others, remind them that this subject is not forgotten. Remind them that if you've got connections to people in Parliament, raise her story in Parliament, in the Pakistani Parliament, if it's functioning at all, that is. And also, in your contacts with the media, Pakistan media is notorious for being free. It's notorious for also, I'm not going to say it, but it's also something that you do have a place to say things in. You do have a place to talk. So raise her case at every place you can. Write about it, talk about it, give interviews about it, and if you have your own social media platforms, make sure that even amongst the young influencers who talk about so many other things, give Aafia Siddiqui a mention. Inshallah, that's what I can tell you for now.
Jazakallah khairan, thank you so much for coming here this weekend. I have one final request, if you could lead us in a dua to finish this.
Oh, okay. Have we got an imam here to do that? I'm not an imam, I'm just a guy.
But now we need a mujahid.
You're going to get me arrested?
An imam now in the moment. Yes, please.
Okay, Bismillah.
Yes.
اللهم أعز الإسلام والمسلمين وذل الشرك والكفر وأعداء الدين. اللهم يا مقلب القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على دينك. اللهم يا مصرف القلوب ثبت قلوبنا على طاعتك. اللهم إنا نسألك بأسمائك الحسنى وصفاتك العليا أن تفك قيد إخواننا المأسورين وأن تردهم إلى أهل سالمين ظالمين يا رب العالمين. اللهم فك قيد آفيا صديقي يا رب العالمين. اللهم فك قيدها يا رب العالمين. اللهم فك قيدها يا رب العالمين وردها إلى أهلها سالمين ظالمين يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعل لها الخير حيثما كانت يا عزيز يا غفار. اللهم سهل لها الأمور. اللهم سهل لها الأمور يا رب العالمين. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وصل الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Okay, I hope you don't ask me to sing a nasheed or something.
No, I'll let you go for this time.
Okay.
Litt kort praktisk info. Vi serverer iftar for brødre i 2. etasje, og for kvinner er det oppe i 4. etasje. Vi starter først med dadler og vann, og så skal vi be salatul maghrib, og så blir det matservering. Det er også et arrangement med vår gjest i morgen. Det blir også her oppe i 3. etasje. Det er ingen påmelding som kreves, og den begynner da etter salatul asr i morgen klokken 5. Og så vil jeg bare minne dere på om våre sosiale medier og be dere følge oss på Facebook, Instagram og holde dere oppdatert på nyheter på nettsida vår. Tusen takk for at dere tok turen i dag, og så håper jeg inshallah at vi ses igjen ved en senere anledning. Salam alaikum.